When the phone rang that afternoon, I thought nothing of it. My mother's name on the screen usually meant a reminder about doctor's appointments or a chat about the weather on Cape Cod. I answered cheerfully, half expecting to hear her complain about the humidity. Instead, her voice was lighter, almost giddy. "Colin's getting married," she announced, as if she had been holding back the news until it swelled too big to contain. For a moment, warmth bloomed in my chest. My younger brother finally settling down. I pictured a church, a reception hall, maybe even a band. I smiled, ready to ask about the date, the invitations, and where I should send my RSVP. But my mother didn't pause long enough for me to ask. "It's family only," she said briskly, and Seraphine. "You won't be attending." The words landed like cold water. I thought I misheard. "I won't be." "What? It's Colin's decision," she continued. "He wants it small, private, just immediate family." I laughed once, short and sharp. "I am immediate family." She sighed, the way she always did when she thought I was being difficult. "You know what I mean, his kind of family. You'll understand one day." I sat back, stunned into silence. My brother was marrying, and not only was I excluded, my mother was standing guard at the gate, making sure I stayed out. Before I could gather a response, she pressed on, her tone shifting to something almost casual. "Anyway, Colin and Leona would love to use the beach house for their honeymoon. They think it would be the perfect spot to relax. Just send them the keys before next weekend." There, it was the real purpose of the call, not to share joy, not to invite me, but to request access to the one place that had always been mine. My chest tightened. The beach house wasn't just property. It was summers of salt air and sand castles. Long evenings with books by the waves, the only place where I had ever truly felt at home. I forced my voice steady. "I'll think about it," I said, though inside something sharp and unyielding began to form. As the call ended, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The exclusion burned, but beneath it, a different fire caught, and that fire would follow me into the memories of what that house truly meant. After the call ended, I found myself staring at the small brass key that hung on a hook near the back door. The key to the beach house. My hand itched to reach for it, but instead I closed my eyes and let the memories flood in. The house had been ours since I was 12. My father bought it after years of saving, a modest clapboard cottage facing the Cape Cod shoreline. It wasn't grand, but to me, it was magic. The salty air, the endless crash of waves, the way the sun dipped orange into the horizon, it was where I learned to breathe freely. Back then, Colin adored it too. He was 9 and always trailing behind me with sandy feet, begging me to build castles or race him to the water. We spent whole summers with scraped knees, sticky ice cream hands, and laughter echoing against the dunes. For a while, the beach house was the one place where we were equals, just a brother and sister. No comparisons, no favoritism. But things changed. My father passed when I was 25, and his will named me sole owner of the house. Colin got other assets, but not the cottage. I knew why Dad trusted me to preserve it, to keep it standing as the family's anchor. Colin never forgave that. Every holiday since, he's hinted, sometimes joking, sometimes not, about how unfair it was. I used to brush it off, telling myself he was just envious, that it would fade, but the resentment only deepened, fed by the way my mother indulged him. To her, Colin was the golden son, full of promise even when his life was built on loans and excuses. Now, years later, that same resentment had taken form. He wasn't just eyeing the house anymore. He was demanding it as though it had always been his. The key glinted in the afternoon light, and I knew this was no longer about memories. It was about a line being crossed, one I could no longer ignore. and crossing that line would bring Colin's image, the golden sun, into sharper, more dangerous focus. Colin had always known how to charm a room. He could walk in late, unprepared, and still leave with praise while I sat invisible in the corner. As children, he was the mischievous one, the rule-bender, the one my mother defended with a soft laugh and a shake of her head. "That's just Colin," she'd say, as if those 3 words excused everything. It hadn't changed with age. He floated from one failed business venture to another, always borrowing, always promising the next big thing. Each time he stumbled, my mother called it bad luck, while any success of mine was treated as expected. Nothing extraordinary. I stopped waiting for acknowledgement years ago, but being excluded from his wedding drew the line in darker ink. Leona, his bride, fit the picture perfectly. She came from a respectable family name that had thinned along with their bank accounts. I'd met her once at a holiday dinner, graceful, polite, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She carried herself like someone who had been taught appearances were survival. It wasn't hard to imagine why Colin had chosen her. She made him look successful by proximity, and he offered her the illusion of stability. Their wedding, branded as family only, was never meant to be small. It was curated, a stage where Colin could stand at the center, admired, while I was written out of the script entirely. My absence would not be a mistake. It would be intentional, an erasure. For years, I had been the quiet sibling, the one who swallowed slights and moved on. But listening to my mother dismiss me so easily, I realized my silence had made it simple for them. I had allowed Colin to become the golden sun unchecked. And now, faced with this deliberate exclusion, I felt the quiet begin to break. The sting of exclusion didn't fade. It clung to me like salt on skin, seeping into every thought. For days after the call, I replayed my mother's words in my head, her calm dismissal, her effortless pivot from telling me I wasn't welcome at Colin's wedding to requesting the keys to my house. The cruelty wasn't even disguised. It was casual, as if I were nothing more than a footnote, useful only for what I owned. At first, I carried the humiliation quietly, like I always had. I moved through my routine's work, errands, evenings spent in silence pretending it didn't matter. But each time I reached for a coffee mug or folded laundry, the bitterness returned. My family's story had always been written with Colin at the center, and I had been expected to play the quiet, agreeable sister. For years, I told myself that staying silent was a form of strength, that it proved I was above their favoritism. But now, it only felt like surrender. That night, I stood in my kitchen staring at the brass key that hung near the back door. The key to the beach house. My father's legacy. The one place in the world that had never asked me to shrink or compromise. And suddenly, I understood giving Colin that key without resistance would be the final erasure of me. So when I called my mother back, my voice was smooth, steady. I told her I'd think about it, that I wanted to make sure the house was ready. She seemed satisfied, perhaps even smug, certain I would fall back into my role. But she didn't hear what lived beneath my words, the shift from resignation to resolve. I wasn't going to argue or plead. I was done with that. Instead, I would give Colin exactly what he asked for, wrapped neatly in the form of a gift. Only this time, it wouldn't be the key to my house. It would be the key to his undoing, and with that decision, the silence I had worn for years finally cracked, giving way to something sharper, something that could no longer be ignored. I didn't rush. Acting impulsively was Colin's habit, not mine. Instead, I moved with care, one question at a time, one quiet step after another. If they thought I would simply hand over the keys to my father's legacy, they were wrong. I began with people who had known Colin longer than I had been able to stomach him. A former business partner answered my call with a bitter laugh. Colin hadn't heard from him since he walked out on the restaurant venture. Left me with unpaid suppliers and a lawsuit, I hope you're not calling to defend him. His voice carried no doubt that my brother was more con than entrepreneur. Another acquaintance told me of a failed tech startup, flashy on paper but hollow in practice, funded with loans Colin never repaid. The more I asked, the more the stories aligned charm, promises, and a trail of debt thick enough to choke anyone who got too close. Small-town gossip filled in the blanks. At the market, an old neighbor leaned over her cart and lowered her voice. I hear the bank is circling. Your brother's been months behind. Lucky he found a woman like Leona, though her family's respectable, or at least they were. Before the downturn, that sent me searching through public records. It didn't take long to find them foreclosure filings on Leona's family property, a series of liens that spelled out desperation in black and white, piece by piece. The picture sharpened. This wedding wasn't about forever love or even appearances. It was survival, stitched together with fragile hope and entitlement. The beach house wasn't chosen because it was romantic. It was chosen because it was stable, valuable, unshakably mine. I closed my laptop one evening with the clear understanding that Colin's honeymoon was never meant to be about waves or sunsets. It was about leverage, about using the one place I still owned outright to mask the crumbling ground beneath him. And if he was willing to stake his marriage on that illusion, then it was time I decided what truth I was ready to place in his hands. Once the pieces were laid out before me, the plan almost wrote itself. I wasn't going to shout, accuse, or beg anyone to listen. That had never worked with my family. They preferred Colin's charm to my reason. So instead, I would do what they least expected, hand them the truth as if it were a blessing. I began collecting. Court notices downloaded from public records, letters from creditors left unresolved, old articles from local business journals that chronicled Colin's short-lived ventures and the messes he left behind. Each page confirmed what I already knew. His golden image had been nothing but tinsel draped over rot. But I didn't stop there. I included documents about Leona's family as well. The foreclosures and liens that told a quieter story of desperation. It wasn't to humiliate her, but to complete the picture. This marriage was not a union of love, but of necessity, and I wanted them both to see it drawn out in ink that couldn't be erased. I slipped everything into a leather-bound portfolio, the kind professionals use for presentations. It felt appropriate. Colin had always loved to perform, as if he were important, as if the world bent to his promises. Let him flip through a performance of his own making. On the outside, I took care with every detail. Silver wrapping paper, smooth and flawless, a wide white bow, tied perfectly at the center, the kind of package that belonged at the front of a gift table. Admired before it was opened, I placed a card on top, my handwriting steady. To Colin and Leona, with love, may this gift serve you well in building a future together. When I finished, I set the box in the middle of my dining table and stared at it. It looked harmless, almost elegant, but I knew what it contained. Not vengeance, not spite, just truth. Layered and undeniable, and soon enough, truth would arrive at their doorstep, waiting to be unwrapped. It didn't take long. 2 days after I left the package at Colin's apartment, my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring once before answering, steadying my breath. What the hell is wrong with you? His voice was already at a pitch, sharp enough to rattle through the line. You think this is funny? You ruined our wedding week. Behind him, I heard muffled crying Leona. No doubt, and the rustle of papers being slammed against something hard. The sound of my portfolio spilling its contents across their floor played out exactly as I had imagined. I sent you a gift, I said evenly. Did you open it? You call this garbage a gift. You're insane. Seraphine dragging up lies, humiliating me in front of my wife. They aren't lies. Colin, every page in that folder is a matter of public record. If you feel humiliated, it's because the truth doesn't flatter you. That only set him off further. A stream of curses poured out, and then another voice cut in my mother's. Seraphine, how could you do this to your brother? On his wedding. You're jealous. That's all. You've always resented his success. I almost laughed, but my voice stayed calm. If by success you mean unpaid debts, pending lawsuits, and banks chasing him, then yes. I suppose I'm resentful I don't have those accolades. Don't twist things, she snapped. You've embarrassed this family. No, Mother, I said, lowering my voice until it was almost steady as stone. Colin embarrassed himself. All I did was hand him a mirror. The line went quiet for a moment, filled only with Colin's ragged breathing and Leona's sobs in the background. I knew they wanted me to crumble, to defend myself, to apologize for daring to step out of my role. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch until Colin finally hung up, slamming the door on his own words. And I knew that silence would not stay contained within their apartment walls for long. The ripple began almost immediately. By the end of the week, I overheard murmurs at the library where I worked, neighbors whispering about Colin's debts, the lawsuits resurfacing, the creditors suddenly moving with renewed speed. It seemed that once the documents left the confines of that silver wrapping paper, they found their way into wider circulation. His carefully polished image couldn't withstand the weight of paper trails and unpaid bills. Leona's anger was louder than Colin's. Word reached me through a cousin that she'd stormed out of their apartment after discovering how much he had concealed. The foreclosure notices, the lawsuits, the promises he had made to her about a stable future, all of it lies. She had signed up for a marriage built on appearances, but not for one built on sand. My parents didn't take it well. My mother, especially, walked through town with her chin high, but I knew she heard the whispers. For years, she had bragged about Colin's ventures, his entrepreneurial spirit, the son destined for success. Now those same neighbors looked at her with thin smiles, the kind reserved for someone whose stories had unraveled. I said nothing, not to them, not to anyone. I went to work, came home, tended my small garden, and let silence do what years of my words never could. I didn't invent his downfall. I had simply laid out the evidence. The rest was gravity pulling everything down. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I walked to the beach behind my house. The waves came steady and certain, washing against the shore as they always had, for once. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't need to speak to be heard. And as the tide pulled back, leaving the sand clean and bare, I understood that some things like reputations built on lies were never meant to stand. The storm had passed, though its echoes lingered. Colin had retreated into silence, Leona into anger, my parents into brittle denial. No calls came, no apologies, only the faint hum of gossip threading through town. For once, I felt no urge to correct the record or explain myself. The truth had already spoken louder than I ever could. One evening, I slipped off my shoes and stepped into the cool sand behind the beach house. The tide had just begun to rise, curling over the shoreline in long, patient strokes. Each step pressed my feet deeper into the earth, anchoring me to a place that had carried me through childhood, grief, and now this reckoning. I thought about all the years I had waited for recognition, some small measure of approval from the people who had always kept me on the edge of their circle. That hunger had shaped me, worn me down, convinced me that silence was strength. But now, standing barefoot at the edge of the water, I realized I didn't need their permission to belong. The beach house was more than weathered wood and glass windows. It was my father's last gift. A sanctuary of summers filled with salt air and laughter, and proof that I could survive the weight of exclusion. They could try to take the keys, diminish my worth, erase me from their milestones, but they could not strip away the ground beneath my feet. I lifted my face to the wind and felt something steady settle inside me. I may never be fully accepted by my family, but acceptance was no longer my currency. Respect was, and respect. I finally understood. was not something they could grant, it was something I claimed. Blood makes you related, but respect makes you family. And as I turned back toward the glow of the house, I knew that I had reclaimed what was always mine.